Hello and welcome, everybody. Relationships are central to human existence. Mothers and fathers, parents and children, people in our communities, and of course, our colleagues and coworkers, to name just a few. Racism is itself a relationship between ourselves and how we view others, or perhaps how others view us. We know that at times relationships can supplant one another, hopefully for the better, and it's our hope that by supporting others and getting better at relating to others and themselves, we can move the ball forward on advancing racial equity. With me today are All Aces alum John Monaghan III, recruiter for the Center for Policing Equity, and Octavia Chambers, project manager and facilitator at All Aces. How are you both?
I'm
I'm
well,
doing,
Rico. Thank you.
yeah, same, doing good.
Nice, nice. Well, really glad to have you both with us. John, you've come on the show before to talk through the core equity opportunities with me, but I'm curious about how your thinking has evolved since you were last here.
Yeah, I've been toying a lot with the idea of power, power over, power with, power to, and power within. And so my thinking about relationships and really about the core equity skills, knowledge, and relationships has really centered around that. How are people? There's positional leadership, and then there's influential or just leadership that people can show, expressive leadership. And so, how do they use that power to enhance racial equity, or not even? So, that's where my thinking's been a lot lately. We could talk more about that in a little bit, but I'm curious about Octavia too.
Nice. Yeah, so Octavia, I don't know if you've been thinking about relationships leading up to the show. I know that you've been on pretty frequently recently, but is there anything that you've kind of been chewing on as far as relationships goes?
Yeah, I think just even in thinking about this conversation today, what I was reflecting on was the way when I was able to have the biggest and the best impact in this work was whenever I improved the relationship with myself. And it was done
Hmm.
through the growth and the journey that I had as I was leading racial equity work. And so this whole conversation just made me reflect on how the relationship that you have with yourself, the boundaries that you create, the way that you engage in the work also is reflective in the relationships that you have with others and truly does impact the work overall.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. I definitely have found that as I've deepened my relationship with myself, I've been able to deepen my relationship with the work and with others. So, thank you very much for bringing that up for us. To the audience now, I'd like to ask all of you watching, what's one thing that you'd wished you'd known about the power of relationships earlier in your career? And I know for me, well, it's a lot, but hopefully we'll get into some of that. So, moving into our questions. So we know that Dr. Martin, the founder and CEO of All Aces, identified knowledge, communication, and relationships as our core equity opportunities. But for both of you, I'd like to kind of dig in here. Why are relationships so important to advancing racial equity?
Want you jump in, John?
I can go first, or you can go first, Octavia. It doesn't matter.
Go ahead.
All right. So I've my just I'll piggyback off what Octavia said about first your relationship with yourself is important because I do believe that social justice work, racial equity work, is an evolution of yourself as a person first. If you haven't evolved as a human being, then you're going to find it difficult to do that work because it challenges belief systems and experiences and all that. How that then moves into relationships in social justice work, it really is about building community, and over time what I've learned is there's ways that I have sort of made relationships with people for certain reasons or gains or whatever, and that really social justice work, the work that we're doing here, I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly, but is really about how can you then build community so community can have influence. And that so my evolution of myself has allowed me to create more interdependent relationships with other people, and I wasn't able to do that when I was younger. I was very sort of ruggedly independent and that type of thing, and so growing trusting relationships. I wish I'd known about that. And part of that is trusting yourself, being confident in your knowledge, and then finding like-minded people who you can share the experience of growing community with is really, it's not just important to racial equity, but I found it's just a blessing in my life. So.
Yeah, how does that sit with you, Octavia? And I don't know, is your thinking moving along similar lines, or where's your mind going?
No, I love everything that you said, and it also made me reflect on something that you said earlier. And I think just in the framing as a Black woman and doing this work within organizations, like that idea of like power. So regardless of like the power that I had, the perceived power that I had, like the title that I had, or the lack of power that I had, relationships is really what helped get the work done. And when you have a relationship with someone, you're really, like you were talking about, you're able to shift perspectives of that person because they're learning from you, you're learning from them. They see you as an individual versus part of a group. You're actually building that intentional community with each other, and the things that matter to you start to matter to them. And they may not fully understand it, but it starts to shift perspectives for folks to come outside of themselves and to really learn from their own experience, awareness, and knowledge, as well as the person that they're in relationship with.
Yeah, that's really great. And you're both talking about interdependence and things like that. I think something that I learned about that was really powerful. It seemed kind of innocuous at the time, but that thing that happens like where one person yawns, then like a bunch of other people will yawn. Well, that's because of mirror neurons, right? And so we have a lot of these things, and they act on us very, very powerfully. So to your point, Octavia, when we're around a lot of different kinds of people, we unconsciously or subconsciously rather start to mirror them, and that's really powerful because people that we are showing similarity to through that physical expression, it's harder to imagine ourselves in kind of oppositional positions or like identifying the difference before we identify what's similar. Also, we have a comment coming in from I believe it's pronounced Asia Monroe. Please do correct me if that is not correct. But if the question here, or the statement or response to our audience question is, what I wish I'd known, whatever you get or don't get is going to come through a relationship. So very similar to what the two of you were saying. Wherever you go or don't go is going to be directly tied to a relationship or a consortium of relationships. Ooh, I like that word there. So responses, you picking a, oh, and she's followed up. That's right. Thank you. All right. Thank you for confirming. Yeah. So I don't know, anything to add onto Asia's thought here? Because I think it's articulated just very nicely.
I do think, well, that there's the saying, you're the product of the top 5 people you hang around with, so and so relationships are certainly that, and then what she was saying about the consortium of people, maybe it's more than 5, maybe it's 50 people, but that you generally will be the product of the people that you're putting your time, effort, and energy into. And to your point about mirror neurons, that made me think of a couple things. One was Dr. Martin would always say, when she's having a conversation with somebody, she's thinking, where do I want this to land? What's an ideal outcome for this conversation? I had a martial art teacher years ago who would say, when you're interacting with somebody whose energy's low, meet them where their energy's at, and then as you slowly pick up your enthusiasm, he's like, you watch, and their enthusiasm will pick up as well. And I found it to be true. And so I think what's interesting in enhancing the work and meeting all sorts of different people who are kind of on a big spectrum of learning and knowledge and self-knowledge, as well as, the academic knowledge, is meeting them where they're at and thinking about, where do I want this to land? And with the sort of the greater thing in mind, to Asia's point, is what kind of community do I want to build, and making that consortium of folks. And what's your role in doing that?
Nice. Octavia, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm loving all this. That whatever you get or don't get is going to come through a relationship, and I'm just resonating on this work, and realizing whenever you're doing this work within an organization, the relationships that you build with decision makers, people that are in places of power to make those systemic changes, are really going to help you get where you need to go. They can either help progress or they can block progress, and I think a part of building that relationship is truly understanding um, what's important to them, because when you're aware of what's important to them, you can be strategic about how you approach them, your understanding of what they're navigating or juggling in the moment, and it can make a difference in the way that you're communicating, and only that you're only able to make those shifts and changes to have a bigger and true impact because you were building those relationships. And so I love that.
Yeah, that's so true. And just reflecting here in the moment, but I've met a lot of people that say that they don't like networking. And when you kind of ask them about it, they feel slimy about it because it's like, oh, it's so transactional. But that's not really building relationships, right? That's building your capacity to have transactions, which makes a lot of sense. And sometimes you need that. But one thing that I was responding to with Asia's comment is that consortium, right? So, like to me, talks about the density of relationships and how it's not a straightforward thing, right? So sometimes I tell the story of how I ended up at All Aces, and it wasn't just because I formed that one relationship with Dr. Martin. There were probably like 20 people involved before I ever got to Dr. Martin, you know? And so if we think about our life paths in those ways, we'll often find that it's very convoluted. But that's also why we need this density of relationships so that opportunities can present themselves and like things can align. And then, as we all know, things can sometimes flow. And so it's the same kind of thing with DEI and racial equity work, right? If it's this very transactional thing, then it will just be business as usual. If we want to transform how we're doing things, then we have to rethink our relationships. So, thank you both for your insights here, and Asia very much for jumping in. Um, so one of the issues that we sometimes have is exactly this. We're trying to help our clients to rethink relationships to advance racial equity, right? So as part of Team All Aces, past or current, how is deepening your understanding of relationships as equity opportunities shaped your thinking on how we can support clients in advancing racial equity?
Can you say that again 3 times fast?
3 times fast? Probably not.
John looked like he had like a real good response prepared.
I'm writing the question down so I don't forget it.
I could jump in there. I think something that recently showed up in the work that we were doing is just the impact that relationships have as external consultants. So when you're going to the organization, I mean, there's this understanding that in order for the work to get done, you do have to help strengthen relationships across the organization. But as an external consultant, it's also super important to ensuring that you're building a strong relationship with not only like the decision makers and folks in power, but also the person that is leading the work. And I've been in relationship with external consultants when I was leading work within organizations where there was no value around the relationship they had with me as a person of color
Mm,
leading the work. And that impacted the work as a whole because I was the one holding it on my own. You can have those conversations with leadership, but the person that's actually having to navigate all the difficult challenges on a day-to-day basis, if I can't trust you, I won't be able to relay to you what's actually going on, and you won't be able to have the impact and influence that you are hoping to have, or you're intentionally trying to have, because that relationship isn't there. And so I think something that's super important for me in my work here at All Aces is ensuring that I'm building that relationship with the point of contact, because they're the person that's going to be able to share with me what's really going on in the organization, so we can craft a plan together on how to address any challenges or barriers that are going on. I think when working within an organization, it's important, as I was talking about earlier, to really understanding what's important to folks. And so I would be in meetings. We would have like an SVP, a finance, I'm like, that person never pays attention to meetings. They're always on their phone. Okay, I'm like, what's important to this person? Let me get a one-on-one. Let me figure out, like, get to know you a little bit. Like, what are you juggling? What are you navigating? How can we talk about how equity is already showing up in the work that you're already doing, or small tweaks that can be made so that you feel good? Like, and it's important to be able to get in those spaces, and building those relationships to understand like where folks are at so that you can meet them where they're at. Because I think a lot of time, when you're in an organization, especially when you're leading the work, you got people come in and they're like, this is happening to me, this is happening to me, because you are that person that probably has relationship with folks at all levels of the organization. And so you're hearing all the stuff, and you're holding it. And you don't always have somewhere something to do with it, but building those relationships with the folks, in those decision making spaces, and being able to translate what you're hearing from staff into what's important to them and what makes sense business wise. Sometimes for the way certain organizations work, you're able to make that through line, and to be able to make progress in the work. And so I just see relationships as just super foundational, whether you're working internally or externally. It's important to ensure that that is like the foundation of where you start.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think what I'm hearing you say is, at least part of it is, when we're forming relationships with others, it doesn't necessarily have to be like, say, a friendship or even a close friendship, right? But we're talking about relationships on the whole. It can be a working relationship, whatever. But part of that is we need to be able to learn about each other in a real way, because if we don't, then it stays very surface level. And when we actually need something, the trust that we might need to get that thing done might not exist.
Right.
And as we know, that takes time. So we can't rush it. Is that all fair to say?
Yes, love that.
Nice. John, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, well, you just said the word trust, and that's sort of what came to me as I was listening to Octavia talk, is about, you first meet a client, and they want to do the work. They're highly motivated to do it. This work is really getting people out of their comfort zone, and so that's going to take a degree of vulnerability on their part with someone they've just met. And so trust is a huge component to building that. And as you stated, Rico, it happens over time, so it's hard to get right away, and so you've got this high level of enthusiasm. Inevitably in that relationship, there will be that moment where there's sort of this like, I feel uncomfortable, like I'm being challenged and stretched here, which is what they asked you to do, like help me grow. But that's an uncomfortable thing to do. And so building trust is almost equally as important. And I think, as consultants that do this work, it's important to one role model. I just dropped my notebook. Sorry. So now that's all my notes. I don't have anything to say. So it's important to role model, behavior that they're trying to learn. It's important to, be able to be gracious as people make mistakes, so that they can feel safe in doing so and learning. And it's important to have a degree of accountability back and forth, so that they feel like they can speak up to you and you can speak up to them, and really get to that communication piece about, having a truly honest relationship with one another, one where you can be vulnerable, and that over time, your competence comes through, your reliability comes through. And that, I think, it really are some of the essential ingredients for building that trusting relationship, which will in fact be the thing that helps them to grow beyond their comfort zone and make a good relationship between your organization and theirs. That's sustainable, because really this work is not just sort of like an 8-hour workshop, now we're brilliant and move on, but it's really about continuing to grow and learn. I've learned more through the portal and the lens of racial equity work about all sorts of things that I didn't know would be so connected. But the work of really self-examination and understanding the world in a different way than I had before, it opened up a lot more doors than just the racial equity door. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely found the same, and I think it's worth noting at this point that we're talking about these things in a little bit of an abstract manner. We know that relationships are hard, they're frustrating, and so this brings me to my next question to the audience. When you're feeling frustrated or discouraged in the state of your relationships, professional or otherwise, how do you deal with it? Because it's one thing to know that we have to form relationships. It's another thing to attend to the maintenance of them. And I say this kind of a lot, but if somebody had told me as a child that most of my adult life would be dedicated to maintenance, I would not have been in such a hurry to grow up. Oh, so moving to our next kind of question area, we brought up communication, right? So, what is like one clear indicator that improving your communication skills is having a positive effect in how you interact with others on your relationships?
I think something John said earlier that I think he said he got from Dr. Martin was, um, did what I intend to say, is that what they heard? And are they leaving this conversation the way that I was hoping that they would, or with what I was hoping that they would? And I feel like that, and of course, there's a lot of things that come into play, but I feel like that's an indication of an improvement in that area.
Yeah, so not exactly being sure that you're on the same page, but like being able to establish that you are through communication is in fact a sign of better communication. Yeah.
Mhm.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think you modeled it here, Rico, where you said you sort of repeated back. This is what I heard you say. Did I hear you correctly? Because I want to understand you, and if I'm not understanding you, I want to make some more room and some more time to do so because I value you. What you say to me is important, and I want to make sure I understand you correctly, and I'm not making assumptions, that may not be true or fair to you. So I think that's a really in live time. If we could rewind the tape, you would hear Rico, practicing really good communication.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, I think it's worth repeating that even in very well established relationships, we often have to go back and make sure that we're getting our fundamentals right, because it's easy to fall into a routine or to do things without thinking, and that's when a lot of inequity actually kind of creeps in, unintentionally. And I think that's something that I would really like for our viewers to internalize as well. It's not just all mean people out there doing stuff, just being evil and whatever. A lot of this is just people get busy, they get distracted, and they fall off of that whole maintenance train, which we know is so important. So, in your experiences as racial equity professionals, how important is it operating either in an embedded organizational role or as an external provider to invest in relationships with organizational decision makers, and why? And Octavia, I know you got at this a little bit already, but I'd love to dive a little bit deeper here.
Yeah, I think when I was working within organizations, I realized that a lot of the times, the things that I was doing, just based on where I was stationed at in the organization, because of a lack of relationship, folks felt that maybe I was having some type of feedback about the way that they were doing their job, or I was trying to go against the grain, or I was trying to add more work to their plate. Um, because I was doing this work in a way that wasn't inclusive of them. And so, what I found is it's super important just to build those relationships, like I was saying earlier, to understand like what's important to the folks that are engaging in this work. For the folks that are leading these organizations, they have their own strategic plans, budgets. It's important to tap into them because they do have access to things that we're not even aware of. But you have to have them a part of the conversation. If they think that you're doing something in isolation that's going to impact them, I mean, that I feel like it's human nature that you're going to like curl up and you're going to feel a little bit tense or a little bit angry about it sometimes. I think it's important for you to ensure that you understand like what's important, what's in their strategy, how can you leverage what's already going on within the organization, so that you can support the work that actually continues to help facilitate communication, knowledge sharing and building relationship across the organization.
Nice. Yeah. So yeah, you want to jump in, John?
I so I like the answer. I think it reminded me of sort of how I started with the power thing, right? Power over, power to, power with, power within. And so as an external person, you may be a thought partner, consultant with an organization with usually the power, the deciders, the people with the power over others, and having a relationship with them where they sort of have this 40,000-foot view. This is what we're trying to accomplish. This is our big mission. And then how do you integrate racial equity work, diversity, equity, inclusion work into that, so that it becomes part of the fabric of the organization, and helping folks see that it is not a separate track, right? Like that is part of the whole mesh, and that one does not run independent of the other. Internally, when you're working in an organization, you see things. You may not be a thought partner with the CEO or whatever. All Aces is very different. Dr. Martin's super accessible and wants and solicits your input, which is wonderful. But not all organizations are like that. They're just huge, or their communication channels are just not set up that way, and so it's now you're how do you leverage, because relationships are a core equity opportunity, right? And meaning that it doesn't matter where I sit in my organization, I have power with my knowledge, with my relationships. And so how do I leverage my relationships in order to affect change where I see change needing to be made? And it may be in that communication structure, that simply the way that it's always been done is not an equitable way. And if the people, the decision makers knew that, they might change it. But getting that information to them in a way that's not necessarily insulting, but points out like there's a problem here. And, a lot of the work that you all do is about that. It's about doing organizational surveys and saying, this is where people are getting stuck. They're getting stuck here. And how do we remove those obstructions so that it is a more equitable organization, that information does flow freely and people can move about in ways that are less restrictive of who they are. So it can vary a little bit, depending on where you're sitting in an organization, or if you're just sort of a partner on the outside looking in. And when you're not deeply entrenched in it, it's that forest for the trees. Like you're able to sit with them, the leader at the 40,000-foot view, and go, oh, that's what you're talking about. And when you are deeply entrenched in an organization, it's sometimes hard to see because everything feels like it's right here for you. So,
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And Octavia, I was thinking about what you were saying about trying to understand people better and what it is that they want to do or what they need, right? So as we can imagine in the way that John is describing things, if people are like deep in their organizational role, right? They're not doing DEI work. They're focused on what the task is at hand. Well, it very much might feel like we're adding work to their plates, and they might not understand how that connects. So if we're thinking about what people want to do, that's we got something to work with there. And there's that famous story of the famous philosopher who's trying to move a baby cow into the barn, and he and his helper are behind the cow pushing it as hard as they can, and the cow's just resisting, right? And then his housekeeper comes along and is like, "What are you guys doing?" And they explain the situation. She thinks for a moment. She pops her finger into the cow's mouth. It starts suckling, and she just leads it calmly back into the barn. And so the philosopher is sitting there like, "Oh my God, what did you do?" And she just said, "Well, you were trying to get it to do what you wanted it to do, and I was trying to get it to do what it wanted to do." So I think we find ourselves in that situation a lot in relationships, right? It's hard for us to get out of that, this is what I want, rather than what does somebody else want, and how can we leverage that to move the ball forward? on something that benefits both of us.
Yes.
But again, easier said than done.
Right. It gets into that fabric of DEI work, that it is not a separate effort, that it's in fact, it's not just it's leading the cow into the barn. Like the mission might be to get the cow in the barn, but DEI work is the thinking about it in a way that everybody gets the job done and they get what they need, right? Like I don't get what I need from the cow and the cow doesn't get what it needs. Everybody gets their needs met if we see it differently.
Yeah, definitely. So for those who are watching and wondering, like, okay, so I believe in this work, I want to get better at relationships. Well, what kind of advice would both of you kind of have for people who are wondering how to deepen, improve, or even establish such relationships in the first place?
It's a good question, Rico.
I know that my grandma would show up with a cake, but I don't think you can do things like that so much these days.
I have so many thoughts about it because I've made so many mistakes and I've had some successes regardless of those mistakes. And so I think about, I actually think about when I studied with martial arts, I had teachers who, when they would go learn from someone, they, because a lot of people come in here, like they're just so full of enthusiasm and they have very little knowledge, but a lot of really great intentions. And you can make a lot of mistakes that way, right? And you can really be microaggressive. You can do a lot of things that can be harmful in the process of trying to do good. And my teacher told me this story. So I guess we're doing Zen koans today. So my teacher told me the story once about a famous master, and this person went up to them and they kept saying, well, how do you do this? How do you do that? What about this? What about that? And they had a whole bunch of questions. And the master just sat them down and he said, listen, I've got this vest on with all these pockets with little pearls in them, and they're pearls of wisdom. And I have just met you. I will share one or two with you, and it gets back to the trust piece. Over time, learning, showing that you are going to keep showing up as a student, that you can be relied on to do the work. You will then, be given more and more pearls of wisdom. And I think there's a bit of humility to it, especially for me as a white guy. I will say that you really got to humble yourself and recognize that people have had a very different life experience than me. And I need to sort of sit in humility with that, and recognize that I've had a life of privilege in many, many ways, which is an uncomfortable thing for some white folks to do. But, keep showing up, keep learning, show that you care, that you can be trusted. And over time, you will build those relationships and you will learn and you will make mistakes and you will be welcomed back with grace. And you will keep learning and growing, and then you will be part of the fabric of that community. And that's a beautiful, beautiful place to be.
Nice. Thank you for that.
Love that.
Octavia, how are you going to follow that, huh?
I know, right? And y'all telling stories and stuff. Oh, I love it though. I think the thing that came up for me was, again, just like doing your own work. And I think from someone that may come from an underestimated or marginalized community, I was socialized not to value my time, my labor, and in building that relationship with myself. I learned compassion, grace. I learned empathy. And those are things and skills that I needed to actually be in relationships that weren't transactional or extractive in the space to do this work. I think for so long I was in relationships where I was giving them so much of me because I'm like, yes, this is going to help the work move forward. I'm telling all my business because it's going to help folks to relate because they have a relationship with me. They see me as a friend. And so I tell them, this is what happened to me. Oh, okay, this happened to Octavia. So this is an actual thing. But that was harming me. I'm having my boss come to me for coaching. In situations where you should not be asking me for feedback on something, especially that was harmful to me. But I'm doing it because you have a relationship with me, you trust me, and this is going to help the work move forward. But I realized in doing that and burning out that I wasn't in relationship with myself. And so I would say, in order to improve your relationship, especially whenever you're doing this work and to truly have a sustainable impact, I love that John brought in sustainability. You do need to do your work. You do need to work on the relationship with yourself, because it provides you with the skills where you're able to engage with folks without judgment, with that grace, with that empathy, with that compassion, and building that further community that will help you be able to get the things done that you want to get done.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And you know, I was reflecting as you were speaking. I spent a long time being very angry about the whole situation, so to speak, about race, without really doing too much work on myself, you know. And it was, this is going to sound dumb, but I realized far too late that one reason why a lot of people couldn't relate to my racial experience is the very simple fact that they'd never been me before, you know. It's like, oh yeah, okay. So I got to communicate what that is like and why I want to do something about it and connect with others who are also doing something about it. But getting to that doing something about it, I think a lot of people want to get there immediately. But as we've all kind of implicitly been saying, it takes time, it takes development, it takes more than self awareness, the ability to step outside of ourselves and say, you know what, we could be doing a little bit better in areas A, B, C, and D. And area E, we really got to do some work, you know, that kind of thing. We have another question from Asia. So it looks like what you were saying, John, really resonated with her. And the question is, John, what helped bring you to that realization? Wow, that took a lot more effort to get out than I was hoping. But there it is, world.
Yeah, you know, I think sometimes it was making mistakes, you know, and recognizing I had made a mistake, having somebody who was kind enough to point it out in a way that I could sort of, after feeling terrible about it, reflect on it and learn from it, you know, and then recognize, and that was humbling, you know, and so you have to be, in some ways, and I'm saying this for everybody that does this work, you have to be courageous to do this work, and part of courage is walking through your own discomfort. You know, and I guess when Octavia was talking about, you know, a boss that will constantly go to you, you know, that and it can be extractive, you know, that you are, the burden is upon you to help me learn about racism because you've had all these experiences that were harmful to you, you know. But one, it doesn't make folks in organizations experts just because they've had harmful things done. It makes them folks who have had a bunch of harmful things done, you know. And so that, you know, in the work at All Aces, we did a ton of focus groups, and I sat with people who expressed a ton of pain, you know. And I think leaders often want to get to solutions and fixes. Part of the fix is going through that pain, you know. And they talk about truth and reconciliation commissions, about hearing a history that's been denied to others and recording it. That's super uncomfortable to do. And so you know, being able to sit with that discomfort and say, this is nothing I knew, it's nothing I did, you know, but it's something I need to hear and bear witness to, and not run away because it makes me uncomfortable, and keep showing up and keep moving it forward. You know, I just think for me that it was uncomfortable, but it was also motivating for me, you know, that was part of the work, not just solutions and high-fiving each other, you know, and celebrating on a holiday, but like showing up every day and being being determined and reliable with it. So part of it, yeah, I guess to kind of conclude, was making mistakes and wanting to learn from my mistakes, you know, and then realizing that I was a different kind of privileged, not the white privilege, but a different kind of privilege to be invited into a world of some people's harm and pain, and to bear witness to it, to hear about it, and to work together to do something about it, you know. And that to me was, I don't know, an honor. And so that for me, that was my own personal motivation to do it.
And I'll just jump in here, as your friend. I do also know that you have a good sense of humor. So we've been in situations where mistakes were made, and rather than getting into the "oh my God, what did I do" kind of space, it was like, okay, acknowledging that mistakes were made, we were able to process it, laugh about it, and then go back into the work and make sure that it didn't happen again.
Yeah.
There's a lot of embarrassment that can, or even humiliation that can
Yeah.
come with trying to get better at things, right? And I see it as one of the biggest barriers that adults have to growth, and why a lot of adults get stuck. But if we can't laugh at ourselves, if we can't have that kind of humility to say like, yeah, I could have been better, then what hope do we have of progress, really? And like, I definitely trust somebody more if they're not perfect all the time, right? If I see them drop their lunch and get back up and get on with their day, I respect that a lot. The
Yeah.
person that's always perfectly polished, like, well, what do I have to relate to there? I'm not a perfect person.
I want to point out a couple things that Rico also made mistakes, not just me.
Yes,
I get to bear
I
witness to
said we.
those.
I said we.
We, right? Big capital W on the we. And yes, humor, even if it's just hitting each other like with a Slack message behind the scenes, just to say, man, did you just put your foot in your mouth there? But just to acknowledge like, oops, and it's gonna be fine. You're gonna be fine.
I like
And
that though. That's the phrase of the day. Instead of yes and, it's oops and. Yeah.
oops, and yes. And then I will say the other thing, one of the most wonderful things about working for All Aces is I could go back to everybody and say, guess what I just did? And they would laugh at me, with me, and process it and talk it through in real time to help learn from it, grow from it, and do it better next time. And that, Dr. Martin was the chief resiliency officer for the city of Boston. She knows a ton about resilient people and organizations, and I've learned so much from her. And so my own knowledge in that has grown a lot. I've done a lot of research into post-traumatic growth, how you can go through hard things and get better as a result of it. And one of the most important things is early intervention and the appropriate treatment and resources. And I would say that a lot of the way that All Aces is set up is for us as consultants doing the work, making mistakes, because it's not like we walk in there all clean and walk out without mud on our face or having made a mistake or being hurt by somebody. People hurt you doing this work.
Yeah.
Sometimes on purpose, sometimes not. But having a group of folks that you can rely on and process it with, you grow stronger. And that, again, that relationship internally makes the community I've been blessed to work with stronger, and a formidable force when it comes to advancing racial equity.
Yeah, very important to share. And I think it's also worth adding here that one of the, well, you two can jump in on this, but one of the things that I really appreciate about Dr. Martin's leadership is that when we do make mistakes, and inevitably mistakes will happen, she is usually the first person to jump in with messages of, don't beat yourself up too much. Like, we do a lot of personal work, and she's always right there. And I'm a very self-critical person, and that's something that I'm working on in my relationship with myself. But she's always there to even just ask the question, like, are you being too hard on yourself?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a really, really important aspect to deepening this work, because if we get into that self-critical space, we can get paralyzed so easily.
Right. And she would, so two quotes come to mind for me, right? Because you're human was, I think, one response. Like, I screw this up. It's because you're human. And then, and life is real like that, because life gets lifey, and not to spend a whole lot of time beating yourself up when you can be doing other things with your efforts. So.
Absolutely. So to pivot back to our audience for a moment.
All right.
Well, all right. What helpful piece of wisdom would you share about building relationships to advance racial equity with someone just starting out as a DEI professional? Or it could be somebody in a DEI role as well. But we would love to hear your comments or read your comments, and take any questions that you have on air. To move into our last kind of question area, All right, so we've been talking about core equity opportunities, which again are knowledge, communication, and relationships. And today we're really honing in on that relationships part. But in your minds, John and Octavia, how do knowledge, communication, and relationships fit with one another, right? So we talked a little bit about how communication and relationships are connected, but how does knowledge come in? And why are these three things the most important for advancing racial equity in your view?
I just talked a lot, Octavia. So
Okay. Um, so when I think about relationship, I honestly think all three are interconnected, because when you're in relationship with someone, you're actually learning about them. You're building knowledge and awareness of their experience. You're becoming conscious of the things that are going on in their life. You're being able to share those stories, so you're communicating, but you're also adjusting your communications to ensure that what you're intending the conversation to be, it's actually landing in that way, and they're able to reflect that as well. And so I feel like they're all three interconnected. I can't say that you can't have a relationship without that knowledge building and sharing, and without communication. They're all three intertwined, going hand in hand. I had a really wise intern who spoke about the concept called conocimiento, which means knowledge. And she always spoke about having attending to relationship before task. And that just speaks to what it is. Relationship is getting knowledge and awareness around what's going on in someone's life, someone's experience, communicating that before you get to the work, and which makes it more effective.
Nice. That was a really nice articulation, Octavia.
Oh,
John, you better come back with it.
yeah. Thanks a lot, Octavia. I'm trying to finish strong here.
You gotta get in there. Y'all been telling all the things.
So I think, knowledge, skills, and relationships. You actually brought up a lot of thoughts for me about it in different ways, right? And so there's the wonder and the brilliance of diversity of life, of experiences, of knowledge, is that you get to hear a whole bunch of different things. And one of the things in white supremacy culture is what they would call objectivity, that I think everyone has seen and experienced the world the way I have, right? And I just can't understand why all these people need things different, and they have different needs than me, and it limits your view of the world. And so when you have diversity of thought, when you have diversity of experiences and diversity of knowledge, and you bring that together, it's an amazing and beautiful thing. And if you are unable to handle that because your limited worldview, you're missing out, And so, so for me, really, those three core equity opportunities, how they're intertwined, is that I used to do this stupid thing when I would facilitate workshops with you guys, and I'd say, if everybody is like matches like this, then we only know that much. We're in reverse. So, but when we have differences, we start to see things differently. And so our five perspectives become, I'm trying to do math in live time here, but 7, and then, and we get more and more different experiences, more and more perceptions, more and more knowledge, more and more belief systems, and that sort of 360 view on something is super valuable, because you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't have the right people helping inform you of that, you're going to make a very limited decision. And if you don't have the ability to communicate with all those different people, then you're missing out on the information, even if it's there, Yeah. So, and if you don't have the relationships with them, then they're not there to get, to be able to share in that knowledge with in the first place. So they're super entwined, and super important, because you make better decisions, you grow in much better ways, and this is what I said before. Like, it's not a separate thing from the organization's mission. You make better decisions as an organization, whatever your mission of your organization is. Maybe you're building better cars, better tires, better whatever widgets may be, but being able to do that with a depth of knowledge, a depth of perspective, belief systems that is informing your decision making. If you're just doing it siloed in diversity, and then you're missing out on it in the rest of what you're trying to do, you're just it's a wasted effort. It's not a wasted effort, but you're missing out on so much opportunity.
Yeah, and to your point, like when you were talking just now, it reminded me of when I used to mediate more regularly. So often in mediations, people would be kind of pointing the finger at each other. And then as they explain the situation from their points of view, it turns out that they were both seeing the same thing, but from different angles.
Right.
And, then after some work, often what would happen is like, oh, we were both hurt by the situation.
Yeah.
You didn't hurt me. But that was the assumption, right? And once we get people to reorient to that, oh, we were both hurt, then suddenly they can connect with one another to resolve their issue. And, a great deal of success, these are completely voluntary agreements. And most of the time, people would not come back to court. But with racial equity, I mentioned at the top that racism is also a relationship, right? So when we get into these very narrow worldviews, as you're saying, John, then it really limits our ability to work on things like poverty. We know that there's a lot of different types of people who are impoverished, and they're all blaming each other, but they're all being hurt by poverty, right? And it's like, we're not going to get anywhere by saying, oh, somebody else is responsible for poverty. Guess what? We're all responsible for it, which is why it's all of our problems and why it's also going to take all of us to fix it.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Octavia, did you want to jump in here?
Oh, no, I'm listening.
Okay, just making sure. And Asia is really showing up for us today, so thank you very much, Asia. So wisdom for the work of DEI. There's a human / a group of humans on the other side of whatever issue is at play. Oh, very much like we were all talking about. I think when things get really hard, if you can just try to keep holding that realization, it will be a little easier to offer grace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, John, I know you talk about offering grace a lot. It sounds like this is resonating for both of you, actually.
Yeah, I talk a good game, right? But in practice, it's harder to do. Especially the closer folks are to you. So, I think people make mistakes, and to your point, there's this scarcity mindset, right? In order for me to win, you have to lose. If your poverty gets taken care of, my poverty doesn't, is essentially the conversation that happens. And when that part of our brain is the driving force, we are really not operating on all 8 cylinders. We're just on fumes trying to get by, and we're not making robust decisions. We're not making holistic decisions. We're not seeing the whole picture. And so, sometimes that's by design, that people want people thinking that way, because that keeps that power over instead of power with. And when you have power with people, then they're able to share in decision-making processes, realize that there is enough for everybody. And that if we can think around some of our common problems, because we do, like you said, we have common problems and from common experiences, which if we can fix that, then we can fix both of our problems, and then the other part of the 2 power pieces, right? Who do I have power with? And what do I have power to do? And what's the power within me to do it? Do I have and so maybe I only have part of it, but that other person who I think is my competition is not. They, in fact, are the person who's got the other piece to that puzzle. And if we work together, if we have that relationship, we can solve our common problems together and find better solutions, and get out of that scarcity, get out of that thing. And so, to the point about grace, sometimes it takes taking a step back to recognize, and it's the pause, right? Like I got to stop triggering. I keep pointing to my amygdala, my fight or flight center here, and my propaganda machine that lives in my head. But like that's easily triggered, and by all sorts of stimulus in the world. And if we can just take a pause for a second, realize that other humans are not our enemies, that in fact, they are people trying to make it just like we are, with husbands and wives and sons and daughters and grandparents. And we just want kind of the same things: to be fed, to be housed, to like not be hurt, to have healthy lives. Like we want all those things in common together. And in that it's not a matter of you getting something that I don't get. It's a matter of us figuring out how we can all have that. So that requires a bit of grace when the message to you is this person's against you, when they're in fact not.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I feel like it's also worth mentioning that this piece around if you can just try to keep holding that realization, sometimes things get real dark and it's hard to hold on to that. So, also this is also where our relationships can come in, right? So at All Aces, we have this concept of collective care. So that being, we're creating space for others to receive care so that when we need to, we can receive care also. And so if I have good relationships with other practitioners, other people who are in this work with me, then they can help me to be there when I'm having a hard time holding on to that realization. They can come in and kind of support me, or just kind of give me a poke, like, why are you moping so much? Get off your ass and do the thing. Usually it's not like that, but sometimes it's necessary. So I guess the last thing that I want to ask to our audience is if you could fast forward to a year from now. So 1 year in advance, so May of next year. If you could fast forward to a year from now, what's one thing in your life that would improve as a result of increasing your skill in having good relationships with others? And I know we're kind of winding down the clock here, so I don't know if either one of you want to jump in and answer this one too. Have at it.
I can make it quick because I think the thing that came up for me is just impact. I think I've been in the space of what you were talking about, a scarcity mentality, being burned out, being in a really dark um, space because of all the harm that was happening around me, and not realizing the help and the relationships that I had would be able to support me in doing the work in a different way. And so for me, I think if I could fast forward to a year and realize that this conversation helped me build my skills and relationship, it would be impact. My impact would shift and change, and it would be what I was hoping it would be.
Nice.
Yeah, for me, it's been I've learned a lot over the last year, and hopefully I'll learn as much over the next year. And it's, again, I said before, like I was a rugged individualism type, and I have learned such power in the interdependence of my relationships, being able to rely on others and have them rely on me. And there's a saying I've heard not a little while ago, but I really love it. I just thought about it this morning, and that is that a burden shared is halved and a joy shared is doubled. And I think that is just it's a little pearl. Someone told me, it's not from my vest, but it's from someone else's. When you're struggling, ask for help. Reach out to someone and say, I'm having a hard time with this. I'm not sure how to get past it, over it, around it, through it. And that burden will be halved, and if that doesn't work, call someone else. Maybe they'll go into quarters. I don't know. But, and then also and not to be extractive, right? Also call them when things are good. So the joy is doubled as well, so that you're saying, I had this wonderful thing happen, and I think partly because of you, I can say that to you, Rico, that I've had wonderful things happen in my life because of our relationship. And and I'm grateful for that, super grateful. And I don't want to always just call you and be like, hey man, I microaggressed somebody in a workshop again, but instead be able to say, I've got this wonderful thing coming up, and if it wasn't for our relationship, I wouldn't have it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, those are great points, John. And to tease something out there that you mentioned, we've all been in relationships where we've fallen into a rut where we think we know what's going to come next, what the other person's going to say, what they're going to do, whatever. If we do that, we end up running on autopilot. And that means that we're not really showing up and being fully present, right? Because we're going off of our assumptions.
Yeah.
That's often when things start to kind of degrade a little bit, So changing things up is also what keeps relationships fresh. and not in any kind of weird euphemistic way, but just, like generally kind of fact-based way. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about that. All right, to close out strong. So if there's people out there wondering, like, how can I know that I'm getting better at this stuff with relationships? Like, what are some things that they can be doing to kind of track their progress?
I would say, do you feel better in your life? Get some good habits to practice, and keep a journal. Like there's this expression, move a muscle, change a thought. Like you can do things to change the way that you're doing. So if you're unhappy, find new ways to do stuff, because the old ways obviously aren't working. And then journal about it every day. Just make a little note. And maybe write the things you're grateful for. I think that's pretty important. And see, read back over the last month or so and just see, how am I doing, and then readjust and keep moving.
Nice. I like that. What do you think, Octavia?
Yeah, what's coming up for me is like thinking about, are you building trust, and are you learning? Like, is your awareness and knowledge of things outside of yourself growing? And I feel like that's a good indication as well.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I think those are both things that people could pull out of the box and try immediately. So thank you both for those thoughts. Any final thoughts as we close out here?
I think just something just around this conversation of relationship is just for folks to truly remember that a big part of doing this work is building that and strengthening that relationship within yourself. Um, because it will really help you build the skills and give you the tools that you need to intentionally engage in relationships with others.
Nice. Thank you for that.
And I'm going to forget who I'm quoting, but be yourself, everyone else is taken.
Yeah.
Is that maybe a Groucho Marx quote? Maybe? No.
You're close. You're close. Similar era, different person.
Okay.
Audrey. No, not Audrey Lorde.
Well, we'll find out the answer to that and maybe get back to it next time. But thank you so much, John, for making time to join us today, and Octavia, you as well. And thank you very much to Asia Monroe for all the great questions and participation. Really, really appreciated it.
Thank you.
And yeah, we're going to be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Intentionally Act Live. So until then, I'm Enrico E Manalo here with John Monaghan and Octavia Chambers. Hope you'll be well till we see you. Bye.
Bye.